"Your body is mine until you give me a son," the Duke said, but she changed everything. Welcome, dear readers, to a journey through time, where the dusty corridors of an English manor hold secrets whispered by the wind. This is a story about how love can be born from the ashes of duty, about how music can heal wounds left open by war, and about how two damaged souls can find redemption in each other's arms. In the following pages you will meet Violet, a young woman whose dreams were traded for gambling debts, and Alexander, a duke haunted by guilt and the past. Together, they will discover that even the coldest marriages can flourish when watered by art, patience, and the courage to choose love over fear. Where are you watching us from right now? Leave your city, your country, in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave that precious like so more stories like this can reach you. Your company on this journey is what keeps us narrating. England, County of Yorkshire, November 1881, Thornfield Manor. The rain lashed against the windows of Thornfield Manor like impatient fingers, knocking on the door of a world that no longer existed. Violet Ashford, now Thornfield, Duchess of Warwick, stood motionless before the oval gilt-framed mirror, observing her reflection without fully recognizing it. The wedding dress from 3 weeks ago lay folded in the mahogany wardrobe, stored away like one burying an illusion. The dress she wore now was wine-colored silk, heavy against her skin, chosen not by her, but by the housekeeper who understood the unspoken rules of that house. Her fingers lightly touched the pearl necklace, the only wedding gift Alexander had given her. They were cold pearls, polished by tradition, devoid of warmth, just like everything else in that ancestral property that now bore her name without carrying her essence. On the other side of the solid oak door, she heard his deliberate footsteps. Alexander Thornfield, the Duke of Warwick, a 36-year-old man with broad shoulders that seemed to carry not only the coat of arms of his lineage, but also the ghosts of distant battlefields. She had only seen him briefly during the ceremony, a man with dark hair where grey was beginning to thread at the temples, eyes the colour of molten lead, a jawline marked by a rigidity that allowed no smiles. The door opened without him knocking. Rights of ownership, Violet thought. Rights over rooms, over bodies, over unchosen futures. Alexander entered, bringing the scent of cognac and hearth smoke. His eyes swept over her figure with the same assessment a general would make of a territory to be conquered. Efficient, devoid of romance. "I presume you understand the terms of our agreement." His voice was low, modulated by years of military command, stripped of tenderness. Violet kept her chin high. Perhaps she could not choose her destiny, but she would choose her posture before it. "Perfectly, Your Grace." Each word was pronounced with the precision of someone who had learned classical literature, each syllable a small fortress of dignity. "My body belongs to you until an heir is sired. After the birth, I will have my freedom. We will live as strangers under the same roof." Something flickered in his grey eyes. Approval, perhaps? Or merely satisfaction that she understood the rules of the game. "You are direct. That is unusual in women of your position." "And what position would that be?" Violet allowed herself a tone of irony. "That of a daughter sold to pay an irresponsible father's gambling debts. That of a wife bought as a broodmare." Alexander moved to the window, watching the storm shake the abandoned Victorian gardens below. Lightning bolts slashed across the Yorkshire sky like luminous scars. "Do not soften the facts with euphemisms." He turned, and for the first time she saw something beyond coldness, an old, poorly healed wound. "That was precisely what happened. Your father owed sums he could never repay. I needed a wife who understood that feelings are not part of this arrangement, a clean transaction." He then approached, and Violet felt her heart quicken, not from desire, but from a primitive fear mixed with something more complex, something that had no name. "After you give me an heir," Alexander continued, his voice lower now, almost a harsh whisper, "you will have an entire wing of this manor to yourself, resources for your paintings, for your music, for any pastime you desire. You will never lack for material things. Just do not ask me for what I cannot give." "And what would that be?" Violet asked, though she already knew the answer. "My heart died 3 years ago, buried alongside my first wife. Catherine's name hung between them like an unacknowledged ghost. That first night was consummated with the efficiency of a duty fulfilled, without brutality, but also without tenderness." Alexander touched her like someone completing a necessary task, his movements precise yet distant, as if his body were present, but his soul wandered in Crimean battlefields or in cemeteries where withered flowers bore witness to broken promises. When it was over, he moved away without words, without any embrace that suggested intimacy beyond the biological. Violet remained lying there, listening to his footsteps recede down the marble corridor. Through the window, the storm finally began to abate, leaving only the melancholic sound of rain running down the oxidized copper gutters. She touched the pearls at her neck. Cold, always cold. But something within her, that spark of determination that had kept her steady when her father signed the papers that turned her into a commodity, that spark still burned. If Alexander Thornfield believed she would be merely a silent womb, he had yet to meet Violet Ashford. He had yet to meet the woman who drew botany with scientific precision, who played Chopin until the keys wept, who read Greek philosophy when others only read sentimental novels. She would fulfill her role. She would give him his damned heir. But afterwards she would reclaim every piece of herself that this marriage had tried to steal. Outside, the rain finally ceased. The ensuing silence was even more deafening than the storm. The third dawn at Thornfield brought a pale light that barely penetrated the crimson velvet curtains. Violet woke alone. Alexander never remained after fulfilling his conjugal obligation, and dressed without the help of the maids. She preferred it that way. She preferred silence to forced conversations, to ill-concealed looks of pity. She descended the main marble staircase, her fingers gliding over the mahogany railing polished by time and by the thousands of hands that had come before. Portraits of Thornfield ancestors watched her from the walls, men in dusty wigs and women with generous bosoms, all long dead, all imprisoned in golden frames, just as she was imprisoned in that marriage. It was Mrs. Pembroke, the housekeeper with the stern face but kind eyes, who directed her to the east wing. "The library is that way, Your Grace." Her voice had the heavy Yorkshire accent. "Though, well, no one has been in there for years." Violet followed the corridor where the morning light created geometric patterns on the faded Persian rug. The aroma was of beeswax, old wood, and something indefinable. Perhaps melancholy had a scent, she thought. Perhaps it was precisely that, sweet and suffocating at the same time. The library door was ajar, like a mouth waiting to tell secrets. When Violet entered, the air seemed to shift. The room was immense, with a vaulted ceiling from which chandeliers covered in white cloths ghosts of light hung. Oak shelves soared until they were lost in the shadows, laden with leather-bound volumes, thousands of them, perhaps tens of thousands. Works that seemed not to have been touched for an eternity, their spines covered by that special dust that only time abandons. But it was the adjacent room that stole Violet's breath. Through an ogival arch was the music room. In the center, like a sleeping animal, a broadwood grand piano rested under a white sheet. Sheet music was scattered on a side table. Chopin, Beethoven, Brahms, all with handwritten annotations in the margins, as if someone had studied them with devotion. Violet approached reverently. Her fingers touched the keys through the fabric that protected them, and even so she felt connected to something greater, something that transcended that loveless marriage. It was hers. Violet spun around, startled. Mrs. Pembroke stood in the doorway, her hands clasped over her immaculate apron. "Duchess Catherine's?" Violet asked quietly, almost a whisper, as if invoking the name could summon her spirit. The housekeeper nodded, her eyes clouded by memory. She would spend hours here, played for the Duke, before. The pause carried the weight of crumbled worlds. Before the war changed him. Before the childbirth took her. Did he forbid anyone from entering? No. Mrs. Pembroke tucked a strand of grey hair under her cap. He simply stopped coming, and when the Duke abandons something, we all abandon it too. After the housekeeper withdrew, Violet explored every corner of that forgotten sanctuary. On the rosewood desk near the window, she found leather-bound notebooks in green. She opened one carefully, like someone opening a heart. Botanical watercolors. Each page revealed flowers painted with extraordinary delicacy. Roses, dahlias, lilies of the valley. The colors still vibrant despite the years. The anatomical details of the petals revealing scientific knowledge beyond mere aesthetic appreciation. Catherine Elizabeth Thornfield, the signature read in delicate script, 1876, 5 years ago, when she was still alive, still painting, still had futures ahead of her. Violet closed the notebook with reverence. It was not an intrusion, she decided. It was recognition, one artist honoring another. In the following days, she established a routine. In the morning, she inventoried the books, using a ledger she had found empty, organizing by subject, by author, by period. In the afternoon, she drew the plants from the abandoned garden, trying to capture with graphite what Catherine had captured with watercolor. And when she was sure Alexander was out, attending to his estate duties, Violet uncovered the piano. She removed the sheet like one removing a shroud. The ivory keys were yellowed, but intact. When she pressed the first note, a middle C, the sound reverberated through the room like a long-held sigh. Chopin. She always returned to Chopin. Her fingers danced over the keys, recreating the nocturne in E-flat major, and for precious moments, Violet was no longer at Thornfield. She was everywhere and nowhere, suspended in the music as if in liquid amber. She did not hear the footsteps. She did not realize the presence until the music died and the silence revealed she was not alone. Alexander was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his face an indecipherable mask. "You play well." His voice was neutral, carefully devoid of emotion. Violet stood up, her heart pounding. She did not know if from fear or something more complex. "Forgive me. I shouldn't—" "The library and the music room are yours." He interrupted her, but there was something tense in his shoulders. "Do what you wish with them. Just? Alexander looked away, and for the first time Violet saw vulnerability in the man, who seemed made of stone and military regiments. "Do not play the piano when I am on the property." It was not a request. It was a plea. Violet understood then. It was not about her. It never had been. It was about the memory of notes floating through corridors, while another woman, now dead, smiled at her beloved. It was about ghosts the music invoked. "As you wish, Your Grace." Alexander nodded and withdrew, but before he completely disappeared, Violet saw his eyes shift toward the corner of the room where a cello rested on a red velvet stand, covered by the same dust that covered everything else in that house. When she was alone again, Violet approached the instrument. There was hardened rosin on the bow. The strings needed changing, but it had been loved, that was evident, used until the hands that played it grew tired of creating beauty in a world that insisted on destroying it. That night, Alexander came to her room as he always did. He fulfilled his duty with the same silent efficiency. But when Violet closed her eyes, she felt an unexpected delicacy in his touch for the first time, as if even unwillingly, even fighting against it, something in him recognized something in her. When he left, Violet lay looking at the carved ceiling, where Baroque angels held golden garlands. A prisoner, yes, but a prisoner who had found the hidden key in yellowed pages and ivory keys, and that, for now, was enough. The screams began shortly after midnight. Violet woke with a start, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a disoriented moment she did not know where those sounds were coming from. Guttural shouts, words in English, and something that sounded like Russian, all mixed into a cacophony of terror. She threw the silk robe over her shoulders and went out into the corridor. The torches on the walls created dancing shadows, and she followed the screams to the north wing, where the Duke's apartments were. A young maid stood near Alexander's door, her face pale as candle wax. "What is happening?" Violet whispered. The girl jumped. "Your Grace, forgive me, It's the nightmares. They come almost every night." Another scream ripped the silence. This time, Violet distinguished words. "Fall back, the cavalry is Sevastopol, and don't let—" "Catherine." The two names intertwined in the delirium, a battlefield and a dead woman. "He doesn't like us to go in," the maid murmured. "Says it passes. It always passes." But Violet stayed there even after the girl left. She stayed, listening to the sounds of war leaking from behind that oak door, imaginary horse hooves, cannon blasts that only existed in memory, screams of men dying in blood-soaked snow, and then silence. A silence as absolute as the screams had been deafening. Violet returned to her room, but she could not sleep. At dawn, she went down to the library. It was there, searching a secret-topped desk, that she found the hidden compartment. A panel slid under her curious fingers, revealing a narrow space where two bundles of papers tied with faded ribbon rested. Diaries, not just letters, intimate diaries, written in slanted feminine script. Catherine Elizabeth Thornfield, the first page read, January 1878. Violet knew she should stop. They were private words, thoughts of a dead woman. But her hands turned the pages as if moved by their own will. "Alexander returned from Crimea today. He is different. The eyes that once shone when he saw me now seem to look through me, focused on horizons of smoke and death. He does not speak of what he saw, but he wakes up screaming almost every night." Violet kept reading, page after page, painting the dissolution of a marriage that began with love but was corroded by war. He insists on an heir, says it is his duty, that the Thornfield line cannot die with him. "But I'm afraid. My mother died in childbirth. My grandmother too. When I look at Alexander, I see a man desperate to fulfill an obligation, but I no longer see the man who played the cello for me under the stars. The last entry made Violet gasp. Tomorrow will be the birth. Dr. Whitmore warned me of the risks. Placenta previa, he said, using medical terms I do not fully understand, but whose weight I sense. Alexander knows. I see it in his eyes, and yet he insists. Is an heir worth more than my life? I fear so. I fear that to him I am already nothing more than a womb and an obligation. Dated March 3rd, 1879. Catherine died the following day. Violet closed the diary with trembling hands. But there was more. The second bundle was letters. Letters Alexander had written but never sent. For how does one send correspondence to the dead? His handwriting was firm, almost aggressive, as if the pen were a bayonet. My dearest Catherine, today I walked through the garden where you painted your watercolors. The roses you loved so much bloom again, but without your eyes to see them, they are just empty petals. Another. If only I hadn't insisted on an heir, if only I had listened when you voiced your fears. But I was blind, blinded by duty, by tradition, by damned Thornfield pride. And the most devastating, placenta previa. Dr. Whitmore warned me of the specific risks, but I insisted because a man in my position needs a successor. You were worth less than titles and property. And now I live with that truth as I live with the weight of the dead cavalry at Sevastopol. Only I did not love those men. I loved you, and yet I killed you. Violet felt tears stream down her face. They were not tears for herself, but for that broken man who now slept in the North Wing, haunted by two wars, one with sabers and cannons, the other against his own conscience. She put the documents back in the secret compartment. Some secrets were too heavy to be exposed to the light of day, but now she understood. Alexander was not merely cold, he was a man who had turned his heart to stone because he believed feeling was weakness. A man who had insisted on an heir even knowing the risks, and was now paying the price in nightmares and guilt. And she was the second time he was trying, the second woman he would risk to perpetuate a name. That afternoon, she found Robert, the head gardener, pruning rose bushes in the south garden. He was at least 70, his hands gnarled from working the earth for decades. "Robert," she called softly, "have you known the Duke for a long time?" The man stood up, taking off his hat in a clumsy bow. "Since he was a boy, Your Grace. I saw him grow up. I saw him leave for war. I saw him change." Robert nodded gravely. "He left a scholar and came back a soldier. He left playing the cello and came back barking orders, and then when Duchess Catherine, can you tell me about her?" The old gardener's eyes clouded over. She was kindness itself. She painted flowers, played the piano, made the Duke laugh. A rare thing even before the war. He was always serious, but with her there was light. And after? After he became what you see today, Your Grace. A man who believes love is a weakness. A man who prefers stone to feeling because stone does not bleed when struck. Violet thanked him and walked among the rose bushes, each marked with small, oxidized copper plaques. Duchess of Portland, Queen Elizabeth, Lady Emma Hamilton. Names of women immortalized in flowers. That night, when Alexander came, Violet looked at him differently. She saw beyond the broad shoulders and the rigid jaw. She saw the shadows beneath his eyes, the way his fingers trembled almost imperceptibly before touching her. When he was done and began to move away, she did something she had never done before. "Alexander," she used his name. "Not Your Grace, not Sir, just his name." He stopped, but did not turn. "You do not have to carry it alone," she said softly. "Not Sevastopol, not Catherine, not the guilt." For a long moment he stood motionless as a statue. Then, without a word, he left. But from that night on, something changed. It was subtle, a look that lingered half a second longer, fingers that touched with a trace of hesitation that suggested humanity beyond duty. It was not love, not yet, but it was recognition. And sometimes that is the first step. December arrived at Thornfield, bringing icy rains that turned the gardens into blurred watercolors. Violet had spent the last weeks cataloguing the library, her fingers stained with stamping ink, her mind organized around the order she created among the oak shelves. But that afternoon something called her outside. Perhaps it was the strange light filtered through the leaden clouds. Perhaps it was the need to feel something beyond the stale air of closed rooms. Perhaps it was simply that, after weeks of exemplary behavior, her soul asked for a small act of rebellion. She put on the heaviest wool coat she owned, grabbed her sketchbook, and went out. The rose garden was being lashed by the rain. The last flowers of the year bowed under the weight of the water, their dark burgundy and gold petals becoming translucent. Violet opened her notebook, partially sheltering it under her coat, and began to draw with the graphite pencil, quick strokes capturing the archaeology of decay, the melancholy beauty of the end. She did not notice when she began to get soaked. Her hair, tied in a loose bun, began to come undone, strands clinging to her neck. The fabric of her skirt felt heavy, drenched, but there was something purifying in that, as if the rain could wash away not just dirt but also expectations, cold agreements, the feeling of being a commodity. "Are you trying to catch pneumonia?" Alexander's voice cut through the sound of the rain. Violet turned, startled. He was also soaked, his wool overcoat clinging to his broad shoulders, black hair plastered to his forehead. He must have run from the house. "I was drawing," she said simply, holding up the notebook as evidence. Alexander approached, raindrops running down his angular face. For the first time he seemed genuinely curious, instead of just fulfilling a courtesy. "May I see?" Violet hesitated, then handed him the notebook. Alexander turned the pages carefully, so as not to soak them further. His eyes, usually hard as steel, softened as he studied each drawing, rose bushes at different stages of blooming, anatomical studies of petals, leaves with veined details like river systems on old maps. "They are extraordinary." It was not empty flattery, it was genuine recognition. "Do you have formal training?" "My mother was a botanical illustrator before she married. She taught me." Violet hesitated, then ventured, "Like Catherine." The name hung between them like a third presence. Alexander returned the notebook but did not retreat. They stood there, separated only by inches and worlds of unsaid things, the rain washing both of them. "Perhaps we are similar in our stubbornness," he finally said, and there was something almost like humor in those words. "How so?" "You remain in a storm to capture dying roses." He hesitated, and Violet saw vulnerability cross that face, previously so impassive. "I refuse to feel because I believe that is how I protect what remains of me." It was the most honest admission he had ever made to her. "Some things are worth saving," Violet said softly, looking at the bent roses still clinging to their stems. "Even when they have been neglected, even when they seem almost dead." "Are you talking about the roses?" "I'm talking about the library, the music room, your cello." Violet raised her gaze to meet his eyes. "Your watercolors." Alexander stiffened. "You found my paintings?" "In the cabinet, in the music room. Landscapes of Thornfield before the war. They are," she searched for the right word, "nostalgic, as if painted by someone trying to remember what it was like to be happy." Lightning tore through the sky, illuminating both of them in a cruel white flash. In the momentary brilliance, Violet saw Alexander's face completely exposed. Pain, longing, something that could be the beginning of hope fighting against stone walls he himself had built. His hand lifted, almost touched her face. Almost. Then the thunder rumbled and the moment broke. "Come," he said, his voice rough, "before we both catch pneumonia and Mrs. Pembroke murders me." They walked back to the manor side by side, not touching but also not drawing away. Something had changed between them there in the rain, among agonizing roses and admissions torn out like unwilling petals. That night, after fulfilling his conjugal duty, Alexander did not immediately move away. He lay beside her for long minutes, the silence between them no longer hostile, but contemplative. "Violet," he finally said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "Yes?" "The watercolors. You can look at them whenever you wish. Just," he searched for words, "just don't ask me to explain them. I don't need an explanation. I understand what it is like to try and capture something that has been lost." When he finally left, he left something behind, the scent of rain on wet wool, and the strange feeling that this loveless marriage might hold cracks through which, drop by drop, something new could begin to trickle. Outside, the storm continued, but inside Thornfield, for the first time since she arrived, Violet felt less cold. The first snowfall of February covered Thornfield like confectioner's sugar on a bitter cake. Violet woke to a transformed world, gardens unrecognizable under a white mantle, trees bent under the weight of ice crystals, the special silence that only snow brings. She was sketching that winter world in the library when Alexander appeared. It was not the time for his customary visits. He looked restless, his hands in the pockets of his dark green velvet overcoat. "I need to talk to you about an event." Violet put down her pencil, curious. "In 3 days we will host guests for the winter ball. It will be the first time since—" He did not complete the thought, but both knew. since Catherine died. They will stay for 3 days. It is important that we appear and that we are seen as a proper couple. Proper? Violet allowed herself irony. You mean pretend an affection that does not exist? Something flashed in his eyes. It almost looked hurt, but it was too quick to be sure. We just need to be cordial, civilized. I can manage civilization, Your Grace. In the following days, Thornfield transformed. Servants cleaned chandeliers that had been covered in cloths for years, waxed marble floors, brought pine boughs to decorate corridors. The manor awakened from a long sleep, and Violet realized she had never seen it with all its lights on, its halls prepared for a party. It was beautiful. Thornfield was absolutely beautiful when it allowed itself to be. The guests arrived in elegant carriages, Lord and Lady Harrington with their marriageable daughters, Baron Westfield, the Earl of Somerset, and his wife. But it was the last carriage that brought the storm. Lady Diana Beaumont alighted with studied grace, a 34-year-old widow, honey-coloured hair pinned in an elaborate coiffure, a peacock blue silk dress that must have cost more than Violet had been worth in dowry. She was stunning in the way women who know their beauty always are, aware of every angle, every gesture calculated for maximum effect, and the way she looked at Alexander. Duke of Warwick. Her voice was honey over venom. It's been too long. Alexander kissed her hand with cold courtesy, but Violet saw it. She saw the familiarity in that touch, the untold history. Mrs. Pembroke, sensing the tension, murmured in Violet's ear as they accompanied the guests. Lady Beaumont had an involvement with the Duke, soon after the first Duchess's death. Brief, but intense. Violet felt something tight and unpleasant in her chest. It was not jealousy. It could not be jealousy over a marriage that was only a contract. But there it was, this ugly thing coiling in her ribs. The first dinner was an exercise in restraint. Violet sat at the opposite head of the table from Alexander, Lady Diana strategically positioned to his right. The woman monopolized the conversation, lightly touching Alexander's arm as she laughed, casting lingering glances, making references to times when we knew each other better. Violet stabbed her fork into the roast goose, harder than necessary. After dinner, the guests gathered in the drawing room. It was Lady Harrington who suggested, I hear Thornfield has a beautiful music room. Duke, would you allow us to hear it? Alexander stiffened. The room has been closed off. Oh, but what a waste, Lady Diana interjected, her eyes glinting with thinly veiled malice. I recall you played the cello divinely, Alexander. The use of his first name was deliberate. I no longer play, he said dryly. It was Violet who stood up. Actually, I reopened the music room recently. It would be my pleasure to show you. Alexander's eyes met hers across the room. A warning, perhaps, or a plea. But Violet led the guests to the room she had transformed. She had organized the sheet music, cleaned the piano, hung her botanical watercolors on the walls in simple frames. It was her territory now. Ah, but it is charming, Lady Somerset exclaimed. Duchess, do you play? Violet felt all eyes on her, especially the ice-green eyes of Lady Diana, who clearly expected to humiliate her. A little, Violet said modestly. She sat at the piano, her fingers finding the keys like one finding home. She chose Chopin, the Nocturne in C-sharp minor, opus posthumous. She let the music flow, each note charged not with empty technique, but with feeling. When she finished, there was absolute silence. Then Alexander, still standing by the door, began to applaud. Slowly, others joined in. Extraordinary, Lord Harrington murmured. Absolutely extraordinary. Lady Diana was livid, but it was what happened next that changed everything. Alexander crossed the room, his footsteps echoing on the marble. He picked up the cello from its stand, wiped away the dust Violet had deliberately left, and sat down. Violet began to play again, this time a Beethoven sonata that allowed for a duet. Alexander joined her, piano and cello intertwined, each instrument conversing with the other, asking and answering, challenging and yielding. It was a dance. It was a war. It was a reconciliation. It was everything they could not say with words, translated into music. When the last note died, there were tears in the eyes of some guests. Alexander found Violet's eyes over the instruments. Thank you, his eyes said. You're back, hers replied. That night, he came to her room, but not as before. He touched her with urgency, yes, but also with something new, attention, as if he saw her for the first time, not as a duty, but as a woman. As if the music had knocked down walls he had guarded for years, and when it was over, Alexander did not move away. He fell asleep beside her, one hand still intertwined in Violet's hair. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, something was beginning to melt. The heavy overnight snowfall kept the guests stranded at Thornfield for 2 more days. Lady Diana tried to monopolize Alexander during breakfasts, but something had changed. He retreated to the library with Violet, discussing book cataloguing as if it were a fascinating subject. It was. On the second night, when everyone had retired, Violet remained in the library. She could not sleep. The full moon reflected on the snow, creating an unnatural clarity that made candles unnecessary. It was Alexander who found her. He, too, was not sleeping. "So I thought I might find you here," he said, closing the door behind him. He carried a decanter of cognac and 2 glasses. They sat by the fireplace, the fire reduced to embers that pulsed like a sleepy heart. "You have transformed this place," Alexander said, his eyes sweeping over the organized shelves, Violet's watercolors on the walls. "I saw it only as a mausoleum. You see it as a sanctuary. Some things just need to be reminded that they still have a purpose." He laughed, a rough, unpracticed sound. "Are you talking about the library or me?" "Perhaps both." Alexander drank the cognac slowly. "You made me play again. I do not know whether to thank you or curse you for that." "Why?" "Because feeling hurts. I preferred the numbness." Violet set down her glass. "Alexander, I found Catherine's diary, and your letters to her." She expected anger. She expected him to stand up and leave, but he merely nodded as if he knew this moment would come. "Then you know I killed her." "No." Violet moved closer. "I know you blame yourself. That is not the same thing. I insisted on an heir knowing the risks. Placenta previa, Dr. Whitmore warned me, but I was young, arrogant, thought duty trumped everything. And now," he looked at his hands as if seeing blood, "and now I am doing the same thing to you. You are not." "I am. You are only here because your father owed money. I married you to get an heir exactly as I did with Catherine. I am a monster who learns nothing." Violet took his hands, forcing him to look at her. "You want to know the difference? Catherine was a choice of love that became an obligation. I was an obligation that is becoming something more." His eyes widened. "Violet, let me finish." She squeezed his hands. "Do not take my music away. Do not take my art away. Because without them I am not myself. And you need to see I am not Catherine. Every woman is different. Every pregnancy is different. I cannot lose you too." His voice broke. "When I played the cello with you, when I heard your music, I felt something I swore I would never feel again, and it terrifies me. Love is always terrifying, because it means we have something to lose." Alexander pulled her to him then, kissed her not as a husband fulfilling a duty, but as a man desperate to feel something besides guilt. The kiss tasted of cognac and belated truths. When they separated, he leaned his forehead against hers. "I have fallen in love with you, Violet, for your strength, your art, your magnificent stubbornness, and I do not know what to do with it. You could start by letting me play the piano when you are home." He laughed, truly this time. "Insolent. I always have been." They made love right there, on the Persian rug before the dying embers, surrounded by books that held the secrets of centuries. But this time it was different. It was choice, not obligation. It was a meeting, not a transaction. Afterwards, lying intertwined, Alexander murmured, "Your brother William. I secured a place for him at Oxford, and Eleanor is at Cheltenham Ladies' College. I thought you would like to know." Violet raised herself up on her elbow, shocked. "You... why?" "Because wasted talents are a crime, and because they are your siblings, and you are mine." It was not merely a generous gesture, it was a declaration. Violet kissed him again, with gratitude and something deeper, that feeling they still dared not fully name, but which grew between them like ivy over ruins, transforming destruction into a garden. Outside, the snowstorm finally calmed. Inside the library, among organized books and old sheet music, 2 wounded hearts began to learn that sometimes starting over is braver than never having felt at all, and sometimes the coldest agreements can generate the most ardent passions. April arrived in Yorkshire like a blessing after an endless winter. Daffodils sprouted profusely across the lawn, the trees were covered with tender green leaves, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and renewal. Violet woke early to paint watercolors of the reborn garden. Alexander often joined her, bringing his own easel, and they worked side by side in companionable silence. She with botanical precision, he with impressionistic brush strokes, that captured light instead of form. The manner had changed. Duets of piano and cello echoed through the evenings. They read together in the library, discussed philosophy. Alexander sought her opinion on estate management. Something had blossomed between them, delicate as daffodil petals, but real. They still had not pronounced the word love, but it was there, implicit in every gesture. It was on a May morning that Violet felt the first nausea. She attributed it to the strong coffee. But when it continued for several days, when her breasts became sensitive and her cycle was late, the truth became inescapable. Mrs. Pembroke noticed first. "Your Grace," the housekeeper said gently, finding Violet pale in the garden. "Perhaps it would be prudent to consult Dr. Whitmore." The doctor confirmed it 2 weeks later, 2 months pregnant. Violet sat in the room, hands on her still flat abdomen, feeling the weight of futures pressing down. She should have been happy. She had fulfilled her role, earned the promised freedom. But she no longer wanted freedom from Alexander. She wanted freedom with him. It was she who told him. She found him in the music room, tuning the cello. "Alexander," she said, and something in her voice made him drop the instrument immediately. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." She watched the color drain from his face, watched his hands begin to tremble, watched 3 years of trauma resurface in eyes that had finally learned to smile. "No." The word was a broken whisper. "No, no, no. Alexander." He stood up abruptly, turning away so as not to show his face. But Violet saw the broad shoulders curve, the hands clench into tight fists. Catherine died from placenta previa. Childbirth complications kill women every day. I might survive." Violet approached, touched his tense back. "I am not fragile." In the following days, Alexander transformed into an obsessive version of protection. He moved Violet to a ground-floor room. He hired an experienced midwife who would remain at Thornfield full-time. He consulted 4 different doctors from London about pregnancy complications. He forbade her from climbing stairs. He monitored every meal. And worse, he forbade music. "The effort of playing the piano could affect the baby," he declared, ignoring Dr. Whitmore's protests that this was medical nonsense. "And watercolors use chemicals that could be harmful." That was when Violet exploded. She found him in the study, surrounded by medical texts, his face tense from not sleeping properly for weeks. "Enough." Her voice was steel. "Simply enough." Alexander stood up. "Violet, I need to ensure what? That I become a prisoner in the name of protection?" Tears of anger burned her eyes. "For months I was nothing more than a vessel for your heir. Now that we have finally begun to build something real, you will lock me away until delivery? That is not... It is exactly that. You are taking away the only things that bring me joy. My music, my art." She pressed her hands against her abdomen. "You are so afraid of losing me that you are smothering me. And you do not realize, the woman who survives the birth will not be me. It will be some broken version you created with your fear." Alexander paled. "I cannot live with the guilt of another death." "Then let me live. Truly, let me be myself. Because the alternative..." Her voice broke. "The alternative is worse than death. It is existence without essence." She left before he could reply, before he saw the tears finally fall. That night, Alexander did not come to her room, nor the night after. Violet lay in the darkness, hands on the belly where life was growing, feeling the true loneliness of that marriage for the first time. They had come so close to something real, something chosen, and now the ghosts of a dead woman threatened to destroy everything again. Outside, spring continued its triumphant march. Inside Thornfield, winter had returned to rain. A week passed in glacial silence. Alexander avoided Violet, burying himself in estate work, returning only late at night to separate rooms. She remained in the ground floor room, painting watercolors in secret when the midwife slept, playing silent notes of an imaginary piano on the air. It was a letter from William that broke the deadlock. It arrived on a rainy, late May afternoon. Violet read it in the library, silent tears streaming. "Dearest sister, Oxford is more magnificent than dreams. The libraries alone are worth the entire journey of our life. Eleanor is also thriving at Cheltenham. Her letters are brimming with a joy I never dared to hope for her. I did not understand how we gained these opportunities when father left only debts. But Mrs. Pembroke, in her kindness, revealed the truth to me. It was the Duke. He paid not only for our studies, but also the remaining debts you did not know about. Violet, you married a good man under terrible circumstances, But his goodness is real. I thought you should know." Violet held the letter against her chest, understanding crashing over her like a wave. Alexander had done that, secretly, without expecting gratitude or recognition. He had secured futures for people he did not even know, simply because they were important to her. She found him in the music room at dusk. He was sitting at the cello but not playing, just holding the bow, looking at the strings as if they held answers that would not come. "Why?" Violet asked without preamble. Alexander did not need to ask about what. He set the bow down carefully. "Because wasted talents are a sin, and because they are yours. You bought me to bear an heir. Why care about my family?" He finally looked at her, and Violet saw deep exhaustion in those grey eyes. "You want the truth?" His voice was rough. "When your father offered you as payment for a debt, I saw fire in your eyes even as you obeyed. I saw resistance. I saw strength. And I thought, here is a woman who will not break under the weight of Thornfield expectations." He stood up, approaching slowly, like one approaching a frightened animal. "In the beginning, yes, it was a transaction. But then you started organizing a library I had abandoned, painted a garden I had let die, played music I had sworn never to hear again. And you invaded every defense I built, Violet. Every single one." His voice broke on the last word. "And now, I find myself terrified not just of losing an heir, but of losing you. And I do not know how to protect one without destroying the other." Violet took his hands, forcing him to look at her. "You want to know what I need? Not protection that suffocates me. I need you to trust me, to trust my strength, to trust that I am not Catherine. No matter how much you loved her, no matter how much her death destroyed you, I am not her. I know. You do not. Because if you did, you would not try to mold me into glass. You would not take away the things that make me who I am." Tears were streaming freely now. "Without my music, without my art, I am not Violet. I am only a walking womb, and that is exactly what I swore to escape." Alexander pulled her to him, burying his face in her hair. "Forgive me. Forgive me for being a coward, for trying to control the uncontrollable." His voice was muffled, desperate. "But when I think of a world without you, when I imagine, I cannot, Violet. I simply cannot. Then let me live, truly live." He backed away just enough to look her in the eyes. "I love you." The words were confession and plea. "I love your stubbornness, your art, your talent, your absurd strength. I love how you see beauty in things I abandoned. I love how you play the piano as if conversing with God." A tear, single silver, ran down his face. "And it terrifies me to know I have something so precious to lose again." Violet kissed that tear. "Then love me enough to let me be free, free to paint, to play, to be whole, because love that imprisons is not love, it is fear disguised." Alexander held her like one holding porcelain, but also like one holding an anchor in a storm. "Play your piano, paint your watercolors, be everything you are." He leaned his forehead against hers. "And forgive me for almost destroying that out of terror of losing you." They made love right there, in the music room, surrounded by instruments that finally sang again. And this time, when Alexander touched her, it was with reverence, not of a fragile object but of acknowledged strength. Afterwards, lying intertwined on the Turkish rug, Alexander murmured, "When you play the piano, when you paint, I see your soul." And I fell in love with it before I even realized I had a heart left to love. Violet traced the strong line of his jaw. "We spent so long fighting this, fighting feeling, because feeling is terrifying when you have already been destroyed once. But it is also the only thing that truly makes us live." Outside, the May rain washed Thornfield. Inside, among unspoken notes of music implied in the air, two hearts learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is to release rather than hold tight, and sometimes the courage to feel again is worth any risk. June arrived, bringing gentle heat and long evenings bathed in golden twilight. Violet's body was visibly rounding now, 4 months of gestation, marked by a light movement she sometimes felt, like butterfly wings against her ribs. Alexander, after the confession in the music room, had relaxed some restrictions. Violet returned to playing the piano, although he insisted it last less than an hour a day. Her watercolors returned, but he banned paints with heavy chemicals, bringing in natural pigments from London instead. It was compromise, not perfect, but real. Mornings followed a ritual. Alexander and Violet had breakfast together on the terrace overlooking the gardens. She painted while he read estate reports, occasionally interrupting to ask her opinion on administrative matters. "Tenant Thompson is having difficulties," he said one such morning. Bad harvest, due to blight. Should I reduce the rent or exempt him completely? Exempt him, Violet replied without hesitation, and lend him funds for new seeds. A man with his dignity intact works better than a man humiliated by charity. Alexander smiled, that rare smile that transformed his face. You would sound excellent in the House of Lords. Too bad women are just decoration in politics. You have never been just decoration in anything. Their evenings were different now. Sometimes they made love with a passion that made Violet forget it had started as an obligation. Other times they simply lay intertwined, Alexander with a hand on her growing belly, feeling the baby's light movements. An heir, he would murmur. That is what I demanded. But now I want this one alive simply because it is part of you. But the fear had not disappeared. Violet saw it when Alexander thought she was not noticing. The way he studied medical texts late, the whispered conversations with Dr. Whitmore, how he sometimes woke up sweating from nightmares where blood stained white sheets. It was on a July night that she confronted him. They met in the garden after dinner. The sky was sprinkled with stars, the air scented with honeysuckle. Fireflies drew luminous patterns among the rose bushes. Talk to me, Violet said softly, taking his hand. About your fears. Alexander did not pretend not to understand. I read about placenta previa, about postpartum hemorrhage, about puerperal fever. Each word came out strained. 3 different doctors have examined you. All say you are healthy, but they also said that about Catherine until they didn't, Violet finished. Alexander, look at me. He obeyed, and she saw raw terror in those eyes. I am not Catherine. My body is different. This pregnancy is different. And even if something goes wrong, even if the worst happens, it will not be your fault. It will just be life being cruel. I cannot accept that. You will have to accept it. Because the alternative is to live in constant terror, and that poisons everything. It poisons us. Alexander pulled her to him, kissing the top of her head. Do you remember our original agreement? His voice was low. Freedom after the heir is born, separate lives. Violet nodded against his chest. Do you still want that? That freedom? She backed away to look at him. Freedom means something different now. How so? In the beginning I wanted freedom from you, from obligation, from being property. Violet touched his face. Now I want freedom to choose, freedom to be an artist, a musician, a wife, a mother, all at once. Freedom to stay not because I must, but because I want to. And you do, Violet smiled, tears shining in her eyes. With every fiber of my being. Alexander was about to reply when Violet gasped, bending over. What? Pain? She gripped her abdomen. Sharp, like a cramp, but worse. Alexander's face instantly paled. I will fetch Dr. Whitmore, now. But the pain passed as quickly as it came. Violet straightened up, breathing deeply. It's gone. Perhaps it was just, we will take no chances. Alexander was already guiding her back to the manor. Not a single chance. Dr. Whitmore examined her thoroughly. He declared everything normal, just common ligament pain in pregnancy. But Alexander did not sleep that night. Violet woke at 3 in the morning and found him sitting in a chair next to the bed, just watching her. Come back to bed, she murmured. I can't. Violet reached out her hand. After a hesitation, Alexander joined her, pulling her carefully against his chest. I am so afraid, he confessed in the darkness, that it is punishment for treating our marriage as a transaction, for not loving you from the first moment as you deserved. Life does not work that way. There is no cosmic accounting of sins and punishments. Hope would be easier if I believed that. Violet intertwined their fingers. Then believe in me. Believe that I am strong enough, that I will fight, that I will come back to you. Alexander kissed their joined hands. Promise me, he whispered. Promise you will fight. I promise. If you promise that, no matter what happens, you will continue living. You will continue playing. You will continue loving. It was a promise neither should make, but both made it anyway. Outside, summer reached its peak. Inside, between whispered promises and confessed fears, 2 hearts prepared for the greatest test they would face. And they prayed, with all the strength they had left, that love would be enough to weather the coming storm. August arrived with oppressive heat. Violet was 7 months pregnant, her body heavy but still graceful in its own way. Dr. Whitmore had said it would be approximately 4 weeks, maybe 5, but babies come when they want to, as the wise midwife Mrs. Crawford repeated. It was on a stuffy night in early August that the contractions began. Violet woke at 2 in the morning with intense lower back pain. She thought it was common discomfort, changed position, but then it came again, a wave that coursed through her abdomen, tightening like a giant fist. "Alexander!" Her voice trembled. "Alexander, wake up!" He sat up instantly, a trained soldier recognizing an alarm. "What is it?" I think it's time." She would never forget the expression that crossed his face, absolute terror fighting against the need to maintain control. "It's too early. There are still weeks to go. Tell that to the baby." Alexander moved with military efficiency, calling servants, sending for Dr. Whitmore and Mrs. Crawford, preparing the room. But Violet saw the tremor in his hands when he touched her face. "Remember, you promised to fight." "I remember." Violet squeezed his hand when another contraction hit. "And you promised to keep living. Don't talk as if—" "Alexander," she forced him to look at her. "Whatever the outcome, you will survive, because one of us needs to be here for this baby. Do you understand?" He nodded, but tears shone in his eyes. The following hours were a fog of pain. Contractions came in waves, closer and closer together. Mrs. Crawford applied cold compresses, murmured encouragement. Dr. Whitmore examined her periodically, his expression professional but serious. Alexander did not leave. He held Violet's hand through every contraction, his face growing progressively paler. "Your Grace," Mrs. Crawford said gently, "perhaps it would be better if you waited." "I am not leaving." His voice allowed no argument. "I will not leave her. Never again." It was at dawn that things intensified. The pain became unbearable. Violet screamed, not from fear but from pure physical exertion. Dr. Whitmore examined her again. When he looked up, Alexander read alarm in his eyes. "What? It is not placenta previa, Your Grace," the doctor said quickly. "Position is good, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Alexander was standing, hands clenched into fists. "There are two." Absolute silence. "Two?" Violet gasped between contractions. "Twins, Your Grace. One was hidden behind the other in the exams. It is not uncommon, but it complicates things." The next few hours were eternal. Violet pushed until she thought she would break. Every scream was a knife in Alexander's heart. She saw it in his eyes, saw how every sound of her pain tore him apart. "Almost there," Mrs. Crawford encouraged. "One more push, Your Grace." And then, finally, a newborn cry filled the room. "A boy," Mrs. Crawford announced, wrapping the baby in white linen. But it was not over. "I need you to push again," Dr. Whitmore instructed. "The second one is coming." Violet did not know where she found the strength, but she pushed. Her whole body protested, sweat drenched the sheets, but she pushed. Another cry, this one higher-pitched. "A girl!" Violet collapsed against the pillows, exhausted beyond comprehension. Her vision blurred at the edges, sounds reached her distantly. She heard Dr. Whitmore murmur, "She lost considerable blood." "The next few hours are critical." She felt Alexander take her hand, squeeze it desperately. "Don't leave me," he pleaded. "Please, Violet, you promised to fight." She tried to answer, but darkness was already pulling her down. Violet floated in a place between consciousness and oblivion. Sometimes she heard voices, Alexander pleading, Dr. Whitmore giving instructions, Mrs. Pembroke praying. Other times, just silence. She had a fever. She knew because she heard fragments. Temperature rising. "We need to cool her. If it doesn't break by tomorrow." Once, during a moment of lucidity, she opened her eyes and saw Alexander clumsily holding two tiny babies. He looked at them with a mixture of adoration and terror. "Your mother," he murmured to the newborns, "is the strongest woman I know, and she is coming back. She has to come back." Violet tried to speak, but darkness pulled her again. 2 days passed. Or was it 3? Time lost its meaning. Alexander refused to leave the room. Servants brought meals he did not touch. Mrs. Pembroke begged him to rest. He simply shook his head, holding Violet's hand as if he could anchor her soul to her body. On the second night, when everyone thought she was not listening, Violet heard Alexander in the chapel. The door was ajar, his voice echoing through the ancient stones. "God, if you exist, I know I have no right to ask for favors. Not after Catherine, not after Sevastopol, but Violet. She is innocent. She deserves to live." His voice broke. "Take half my fortune. Take the estate. Take my life if necessary. Just let her stay." It was the desperate bargain of a man without faith trying to negotiate with an indifferent universe. But perhaps the universe listened. On the third morning, when the golden light of dawn filtered through the curtains, the fever broke. Violet opened her eyes. truly opened them, focused and conscious, and found Alexander asleep in the chair beside the bed, holding her hand even in slumber. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. He woke instantly, and when he saw her eyes open, lucid, something in him broke. Tears, so many tears, streamed down his face as he kissed her hands, her face, her forehead. "You came back. Thank God you came back." Dr. Whitmore examined her thoroughly. He declared that though weak, recovery was underway. It would be slow but complete. "You can see the babies now," he said with a tired smile. Mrs. Crawford brought them, 2 bundles wrapped in white linen. Violet held them, one in each arm, and felt a love so intense it hurt more than any contraction. The boy had serious eyes, already grey like his father's. The girl, lighter hair, pink cheeks. "They are perfect," Violet murmured. "Like their mother," Alexander said, gently touching the cheek of each baby. "They need names." Alexander hesitated. "I thought, if you agree, William Alexander for our son, for your brother." Violet smiled. "Perfect. And for her." She looked at Alexander, seeing vulnerability in his eyes. "Catherine Violet." He widened his eyes. "Violet, you do not have to. She was part of your life. She shaped who you are. I would not erase her memory. She deserves to be remembered with love, not pain." Alexander kissed her then with a tenderness that held gratitude, relief, a love so profound that words would never reach it. In the following weeks, Violet slowly regained her strength. Alexander transformed into a dedicated father, often with a baby in his arms, clumsily learning to change nappies, soothing nightly cries. Servants commented among themselves, "The Duke is smiling again like he did before the war." It was on a golden afternoon in September, when Violet was finally strong enough to stand, that she went to the music room. She sat at the piano carefully. Her fingers found the keys and she began to play, softly at first, then with more confidence. Brahms' Lullaby, sweet and melancholic. Alexander entered with the cello, joined the duet without words. Piano and cello intertwined, singing not of pain or loss but of hope and new beginnings. The twins in a nearby cradle fell asleep to the sound. When the music ended, Alexander put down his bow and approached. "Violet Ashford Thornfield," he said formally, but his eyes sparkled. "You have fulfilled your obligation. You have given me not 1, but 2 heirs. According to our original agreement, you are now free." Violet tilted her head, understanding the game. "What if I wish to rescind our contract entirely? How so? What if instead of a business agreement I desire a true marriage, one based on choice, not obligation?" Alexander knelt before her, Duke of Warwick, war veteran, kneeling like a supplicant. "Is that what you wish? Not obligation, but choice?" "I choose you, Alexander." Violet touched his face. "I choose the man who plays the cello, who paints watercolors, who protects tenants, who weeps when he loves. I choose the man I have learned to love, not despite our circumstances, but through them. I love you, Violet. With every beat of this heart I thought was dead." He kissed her hands. "You invaded the defenses I built, brought music back, taught me that feeling is worth any risk. Then ask me again, properly this time." Alexander smiled, that rare, true smile. Violet Ashford Thornfield, not as Duke to Duchess, but as man to woman, as musician to musician. "As soul to soul, will you marry me?" "Yes, 1,000 times yes." And there, surrounded by music and sleeping babies, between sheet music and watercolors, 2 hearts sealed a new agreement, one written not in contracts and obligations, but in choice and love. September ripened into October, and Thornfield transformed into a palette of golds and reds. Violet regained her strength daily, not yet fully restored, but clearly reborn. Alexander suggested a small ceremony, a renewal of vows just for them. "We married once out of duty," he explained. "I want to marry again out of choice." They spent weeks planning. Violet painted watercolors of autumn flowers to decorate the chapel. Alexander practiced a special cello piece. Mrs. Pembroke sewed a new dress for Violet, not the white of feigned virginity, but a deep blue, the color of the autumn sky over Yorkshire. The twins thrived. William Alexander, with a birthmark shaped like a musical note on his shoulder, was serious and observant. Catherine Violet was all smiles and coos. Both already responded to music. They stopped crying when the piano or cello began to play. "They inherited our blood," Alexander joked. "Music is in their veins." On the night before the ceremony, Violet found Alexander in the library. He was standing by the window, watching the full moon over the gardens. Thinking of Catherine, she asked gently, joining him, thinking that she deserved someone who protected her better, but also thinking that without that loss, without that pain, perhaps I would never have learned to truly value what I have now. He turned to Violet. I do not rejoice in her death, I never will, but I am grateful, in a complex, painful way, for having learned that love which imprisons destroys, and that love which frees saves. Violet intertwined their fingers. She would be happy for you, for us, because women who love do not want eternal suffering for those they leave behind. They want life to continue. Alexander kissed her under the moonlight, and it was a kiss of gratitude, of promise, of futures chosen instead of imposed. The ceremony took place on a golden October afternoon, in the same chapel where they had married the first time. But what a difference! Present were only Mrs. Pembroke, Robert, Dr. Whitmore, and the twins in a cradle decorated with autumn leaves. Violet walked to the altar, not led by the father who had sold her, but alone, her own choice, her own steps. Alexander waited in simple, formal attire, but it was the expression on his face that stole her breath. Pure, unreserved adoration, free of fears. There was no priest. They wrote their own vows. Violet, Alexander began, his voice firm but emotional. When we married the first time, I saw only a transaction. A terrible mistake, because you were never a commodity. You were always strength, always art, always a light I was too blind to see. He held her hands. I promise never again to imprison you in the name of protection. I promise to celebrate your music, your art, your extraordinary strength. I promise to be a partner, not an owner, a lover, not a lord. I promise to grow old by your side, to play the cello while you play the piano, to paint watercolors of every season we live through together. Tears streamed freely down Violet's face. Alexander, she said when it was her turn, you bought me for gambling debts. It could have been a nightmare, but you gave me a library to organize, a music room to play in, a garden to paint. You gave me space to be myself even when the agreement only required me to be a womb. She squeezed his hands. I promise to remain stubborn, to keep playing the piano too loudly, to keep painting until my hands are stained. I promise not to let you sink into guilt or fear. I promise to love you not despite your wounds, but whole, scars, nightmares and all. I promise our music will never die. They exchanged new rings Alexander had commissioned, simple gold engraved with musical notation on the inside. With this ring, I choose you, Alexander said. With this ring, I choose you, Violet repeated. They sealed their vows with a kiss, and when they separated, even Dr. Whitmore was wiping his eyes. Alexander picked up the cello. Violet sat at the portable piano they had brought to the chapel. They played a duet, their own creation, improvised, where each instrument asked and the other answered, where melodies intertwined like lives, where harmony was not the absence of differences, but the celebration of them. The twins, as if sensing the moment's importance, remained silent, just watching with wide eyes. When the last note died, it was Mrs. Pembroke who broke the silence. Welcome to the rest of your lives, your graces. Chosen lives. The celebration that followed was simple. Tea in the library, cakes Mrs. Pembroke had baked, conversation among true friends instead of feigned society. When night fell and the guests retired, Alexander and Violet walked through the gardens under the full moon, the twins sleeping in the arms of nurses. You know, Violet said, when I arrived at Thornfield last November, I thought my life was over, that I would just be a prisoner in a gilded cage. And now? Now I know that sometimes prisons can turn into homes, contracts can blossom into love, and the coldest agreements, she smiled, can generate the warmest passions. Alexander laughed, pulling her in for a kiss. For my next act of rebellion as a chosen wife, Violet murmured against his lips, I plan to organize a gallery with our watercolors, yours and mine, to show that art and love can coexist with duty. Approved, but I have a condition. What is it? Every morning we play a duet, piano and cello, no matter how much work there is. 1 hour is ours. Accepted. They walked back to the manor that was no longer a prison, but a home. They passed the reorganized library, the music room that echoed again, the rooms where the twins slept peacefully. Thornfield was reborn. Not by erasing the past. Catherine was still remembered in her daughter's name, in the garden she had loved, in the music she had played, but by adding new layers, Violet's watercolors on the walls, the laughter of babies in the corridors, the promise of chosen futures. That night, making love as chosen husband and wife, Alexander murmured, "Thank you for invading my defenses, for refusing to be only what the agreement demanded, for forcing me to feel again." Violet traced the old scars on his chest, physical and emotional. "Thank you for giving me space to grow, for learning that love means to liberate, not to bind." Outside, the autumn wind whistled among the rose bushes. Inside, between linen sheets and whispered promises, two hearts found a peace that only comes when choice replaces obligation. And music, always music, filled the silences, transforming a cold stone house into a sanctuary of human warmth. November returned, completing the cycle. It had been exactly 1 year since Violet had arrived at Thornfield as a purchased bride, trembling in the icy rain. How much had changed? The twins were 3 months old now, robust and healthy. William was beginning to hold objects with tiny hands. Catherine smiled at anyone who looked her way, but it was a letter that arrived that November morning that brought a moment of final truth. Alexander received it during breakfast. He recognized the seal immediately. Family Lawyers, the firm that had served the Thornfields for generations. He opened it with curiosity, then paled. "What is it?" Violet asked, setting down her teacup. Alexander handed her the letter without a word. It was Catherine's will, written months before she died, only discovered now during an inventory of old documents. "To Alexander, my beloved husband," Violet read aloud, "if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. I have left during childbirth or soon after, and you remain. I know you well enough to know that guilt will consume you, that you will tell yourself that you killed me by insisting on an heir." Violet looked at Alexander. Tears were already streaming silently down his face. She continued reading, "But you must know I chose to try. Even knowing the risks Dr. Whitmore explained, I chose to try to give you a son because I saw how much duty weighed on you, how much you need a successor for the lineage you have protected for centuries. If I erred, it was in not better communicating my fears, but never in loving you, and never in choosing to try. When you read this, I will be dead, and you, knowing you as I do, will have turned your heart to stone. You will have sworn never to love again, never to risk again. Do not do that, my love. Live, play the cello, paint watercolors. Find someone, not to replace me, for we are irreplaceable like snowflakes, but to start again. Love is not a betrayal of memory. Love is honoring it by refusing to die with the one who left. If another woman ever comes, love her completely. Do not compare her to me. Do not trap her in an excessive protective shell. Let her be free, strong, whole. And if she bears you children, love them not for being heirs, but for being theirs, hers. Forgive yourself, Alexander. It was my choice, my decision, my love for you that made me try despite the risks. You did not kill me. I chose to live fully, loving completely, risking everything. And I would do it again. With all my love, even beyond death." Catherine Elizabeth Thornfield. Absolute silence followed. Then Alexander broke down. Not silent tears, but deep sobs from a man who had carried guilt for 3 years, who had punished himself, who had almost destroyed a chance at new happiness by believing he deserved only solitude. Violet went to him, held him as he wept, for the lost love, for the unnecessary guilt, for the time wasted in self-punishment. "She forgave you," Violet murmured. 3 years ago, she had already forgiven you. Now you need to forgive yourself. It took time. Alexander spent hours in the chapel, rereading the letter, finally letting Catherine's words penetrate. When he returned at dusk, he found Violet in the music room. She was playing the piano softly, the twins asleep in a nearby cradle. Alexander sat at the cello, joined her. They played, not a sad melody of mourning, but something new, something that honored the past, but celebrated the present. When they finished, Alexander spoke. "For 3 years, I carried guilt as penance. I believed that suffering was honoring her, but I was wrong." He looked at Violet. "I honor Catherine by living, by loving you, by being the father she would have wanted me to be, by playing the music she loved." "She was wise," Violet said softly. "She was, and she was right about everything." Alexander took Violet's hand. "Especially about you." "How so?" "She told me not to trap the next woman in excessive protection, to let her be free, strong, whole." He laughed bitterly. "And the first thing I did was exactly that. I almost lost you trying to save you. But you learned. You changed. Because you refused to be imprisoned. Because you fought not just for an heir, but for yourself." Alexander kissed her hands. "Catherine would be proud of you. I am sure of it." That night, for the first time since her death, Alexander visited Catherine's tomb. Violet accompanied him, carrying both twins. The headstone was simple white marble. Catherine Elizabeth Thornfield, 1854–1879, beloved wife, artist, musician. Alexander knelt, touching the cold stone. "I found someone," he said in a low voice, "as you commanded, and I love her, not in the same way I loved you, but completely in her own way." Violet watched, tears streaming. "I gave you 2 babies, twins, a boy and a girl. We named the girl after you." Alexander smiled through his tears. "Catherine Violet. Because both of you deserve to be remembered. Both of you deserve to be loved." He stood up, turned to Violet. "Thank you for freeing me. From the guilt, from the fear, from the prison I built." They walked back to Thornfield together, the twins sleeping against their shoulders. The manor glowed with candlelight, Mrs. Pembroke visible through the window preparing dinner. "Home," Alexander murmured. "Thornfield is home again." "It always was," Violet replied. "It was just waiting for you to realize it." And there, under the November sky where the first stars began to appear, a family formed not by blood or duty, but by choice and love, crossed the gate of Thornfield. Behind them, ghosts finally rested. Ahead, infinite futures awaited. Spring returned to Thornfield. Not the spring of the previous year, when fear stained every flower, but a new spring, when the gardens redesigned by Violet bloomed profusely, when children's laughter echoed through the previously silent corridors. The twins were 6 months old now. William showed a fascination with any object that made a sound. He shook rattles with serious determination, banged spoons on pots. Catherine was all graceful movement, already trying to roll over, smiling at anyone who looked her way. "A dancer and a musician," Alexander commented, watching them during breakfast on the terrace. "Like us," Violet replied, smiling. The gallery she had planned was almost complete. The walls of the south wing now displayed watercolors. Catherine Elizabeth Thornfield on the left half, her delicate scientific flowers preserved under glass. Violet Ashford Thornfield on the right half, her wild and impressionistic plants. And in the center, collaborative works by Alexander and Violet. Landscapes of Thornfield through the seasons, painted together. It was a testament, not to forgetting but to continuity. William and Eleanor visited in May. Violet's brother was transformed, a young Oxford scholar full of ideas about social reform. Eleanor, on a break from Cheltenham, brought notebooks filled with poetry. "You saved our lives," William said to Alexander during dinner. "You gave us futures when we had only debts." Alexander looked away, uncomfortable with gratitude. "The debts were your father's responsibility, not yours. Wasting talent would be the real crime." It was Violet who took his hand under the table, squeezing it. He looked at her and smiled. That smile that transformed his face, which she still remembered, was rare, precious. Eleanor spent time in the music room, marveling. "You did it," she said to Violet as they played a simple duet. "You found love where it seemed impossible." "I did not find it," Violet corrected. "We built it, day by day, note by note." June brought a celebration, their first true wedding anniversary. Not the cold, contractual November wedding, but the October renewal. Alexander planned a surprise. He hired a small orchestra from York. He transformed the ballroom, closed since Catherine's death, into an indoor garden with hundreds of white roses. When Violet came downstairs dressed in sea green silk, Alexander waited in formal attire. "May I have this dance, Duchess?" "Always, Duke." They danced while the orchestra played, not the formal society dances, but a simple waltz, their bodies perfectly synchronized like the piano and cello. "You know," Alexander murmured as they spun, "when I married you the first time, I did not dance. I was too stiff, too afraid. And now I realize that dancing is like loving. It requires trust, vulnerability, a willingness to move with the other instead of controlling them." Violet laughed, a crystalline sound that made hearts around them smile. "You have become a poet, Alexander Thornfield. You made me a poet." After the ball, they walked through the gardens under the full moon, the same gardens where, a year ago, Violet had sketched in the rain, and Alexander had come to fetch her. "Do you remember?" he asked, stopping by the rose bushes. "Every moment." Violet touched the soft petals. "You said perhaps we were similar in stubbornness, and you said some things were worth saving even when neglected. Like you, like us." Alexander pulled her to him, kissed her under the stars. "Violet Ashford Thornfield," he murmured against her lips, "for my next act of rebellion as a chosen wife, I was planning to organize a gallery with our watercolors, yours and mine, to show that art and love can coexist with duty. Approved. But I have a condition. What is it? Every morning we play a duet, piano and cello. No matter how much work there is, 1 hour is ours. Accepted. They walked back to the manor that was no longer a prison, but a home. They passed the reorganized library, the music room that echoed again, the rooms where the twins slept peacefully. We have everything, Alexander murmured. Love, family, art, music, purpose, and choice, Violet added. Always choice. Weeks later, Violet discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear. Dr. Whitmore confirmed she had fully recovered from the previous birth. Alexander, though protective, did not imprison her. I trust you, he said simply, in your strength, in your knowledge of your own body. And when the time came, late February of the following year, a healthy baby girl was born without complications. They named her Eliza Rose, in homage to Catherine Elizabeth and the roses Violet had painted in the rain. Thornfield was complete now, not a silent mansion of ghosts and guilt, but a home pulsating with life, music, and love. Years later, when the twins were 5 and Eliza 3, visitors commented on the extraordinary family at Thornfield, about the Duke who played the cello for his children before bedtime, about the Duchess whose botanical watercolors were celebrated in the Royal Society, about the children who grew up amidst books and music, art and freedom. But what they truly noticed was the look between the Duke and Duchess, the way Alexander watched Violet as she painted, the way Violet smiled when Alexander picked up the cello, the way they played duets every morning, without fail, like a sacred ritual. It was love. Not the easy love of fairy tales, but love forged through difficult choices, painful growth, and the courage to feel after devastating loss. It was love that transformed a cold agreement into an ardent passion. And in the quiet nights of Yorkshire, when the wind whistled over the moors and the moon shone upon the renewed gardens, one could hear, if one listened closely, the echo of piano and cello intertwined, the sound of two souls who found each other in the most unlikely of places, and chose day after day, note after note, to remain forever.